everybody! It's Gaba here. So, guys, probably you're a bit surprised I'm speaking English now, but today I decided to make a very special English podcast. This episode is for my students who are beginners and who are trying to speak Polish, and they are very frustrated and they think it's impossible to speak Polish. But guys, I found a foreigner who can speak Polish, and he has a lot of tips for you. And today in this episode, we're talking about how to combat Polish and speak or use this language. Okay, so my guest is Eliseu JR. Eliseu, please introduce yourself.
Okay, it's very nice to be here in the episode in English now. My name is Eliseu, like you said. I was born in Brazil. I've been living in Poland for almost 2 years, and I'm 26. And yeah, I also have a podcast about languages, and I also teach foreign languages. So yeah, I've been in this journey of learning Polish for 2 years already. My Polish is still not like extremely good, but I think I can consider myself independent here in Poland. I can communicate and solve all the issues and challenges I have here.
Yes, so I think your Polish is like somewhere about like A2, B1, and I think your speaking proficiency is very high because I see you can understand a lot and you can ask a lot, and you can also you just know a lot of slang, but it's another story. We'll also talk about it. Can you show your tips? Can you reveal your secrets? How is it possible you can speak Polish? And how did you start it?
Well, it's like a very long story. I can say like this 2 years that I've been learning Polish. So in the beginning, I think was like I didn't know almost anything about the languages. I didn't know about the cases and anything. I just started like learning stuff. And when I moved to Poland, I tried to learn some basic phrases, so some very basic stuff I knew, but it was like still not enough to communicate with anyone. And then I started to you mentioned about the slangs, and because of like living in Poland, working with Poland, I started to get more exposed to Polish. And when you live in a country, you learn some things even if you don't want to learn. And I like Polish was my first Slavic language, and I didn't know how to approach it. Like now learning Russian, I have an idea, but with Polish, I really had no idea, and so I made a lot of mistakes. So like I can share some of them that I made that I don't I think it's better for people to avoid making these mistakes. At least if I would with Russian, I try not to make the same mistakes. And yeah, so like we were saying about the slangs, like having contact with Polish people, I was learning a lot of random words, and I think that in the beginning was not a very good approach because I was learning a lot of things very fast, but I didn't know how to use them. I think like slangs and swear words, you need to understand better the culture and better the language to use them in the right time, in the right moment. Because if you don't use if you don't know the culture, you use them in wrong situations, and you can get in trouble. You can sound rude. So yeah, in the beginning I was like improving a lot my Polish, but was still very unorganized. I started like watching movies, and every time I was seeing like an interesting phrase, I was making flashcards with them. So that's something that I also like is a tip I have. If you want to make flashcards or try to memorize always phrases and not only words, because like words, if you just memorize a word in the beginning, you don't know how to use it. So if you memorize a whole phrase, and then it's easier for you to apply it. So when I was learning a new phrase, I was trying to use with people from my work or with some people I knew. But as I said, like my Polish was very unorganized for a long time, but the flashcards, yeah, for sure, it was something that really helped me in the beginning. But the point is, I was not actually using my Polish. Like, was like a very passive knowledge of the language, and then I decided to create new occasions to speak Polish. It's like because it's very easy to live in Poland speaking in English, right? You go to a restaurant, go to a cafe. Like if you are a foreigner, you probably work with English-speaking people or Russian-speaking people, and you don't actually need Polish. and it's very comfortable. And I started to try to really speak Polish. If I was going to a cafe, I was okay. Can I try in Polish, or I will talk with the person in Polish till the person replies me in Polish, or I just pretend I don't speak English. And it's like a big game changer in my learning was the moment that I decided to find a language partner. It wasn't easy to find a language partner because I think there are a lot of things we need to consider. So, does your language partner speaks like already a language that you have a language in common? What's the background of your language partner? Do you have common interests? Because at the end, it will be someone that you will be talking every week, for example, at least once. So you need to create a connection with the person to have a commitment that you will talk, you will help each other. So it wasn't easy. I tried like with many people, and I found a girl. So like some tips about how to find a language partner. I think it's important to look in the right places. So for example, there's an app called Tandem. So you can find people who wants to improve their language skills or start learning new skills, start learning new languages, and you can help them with your mother tongue or the language that you speak well. Also, another tip is I think every big city have Facebook groups where people wants to offer languages and look for people who speak languages they are learning is also a good option. Yeah. So you can always like leave a message there saying, okay, I'm from this country. I would like to learn, for example, Polish. I speak, Portuguese, Spanish, or something, and people will contact you. And I think it's perfectly alright that you will, at certain moment, you say, okay, this person doesn't match to be my language partner. Didn't create a connection. The person doesn't match my expectations and my needs, and it's pretty alright. There is nothing wrong with that. But I found a girl that she's married with a Colombian guy, so she already speaks Spanish, and she understands my culture and my mentality very well. So she knew, and she taught her husband Polish. So she knew the way that I would need to go through to learn Polish. And it was really different than the other language partners I had. So she knew what would be hard for me, what wouldn't be. And it was the first time that I started to use this knowledge that I had in Polish, which was very passive, that I was learning from the flashcards, from the phrases that I was collecting, that I was learning from people. And then I noticed that I was improving my knowledge, but I gained confidence to learn. And I got motivated to keep learning the language because it was a motivation that I, at certain point, I lost because I don't have a lot of Polish friends. I didn't have occasions to use. And because of this motivation, I feel confident. I started to feel confident to use the language. In the moment, like when we met, was the first occasion that I had to really use Polish, like in a party, only Polish. And it was just like 3 months after after I met my language partner. And it was really a game changer for me. If it would be like 4 months earlier, I would not be able to have like a full conversations in Polish. So this is something I think having a language partner really changed my my approach to Polish, my connection to the language, and I started to understand better the culture when I started to be able to communicate better with people. And once you are more motivated, I think it's easier for you to learn new stuff. Because when you are practicing, you are learning, but not so much. You are more developing your communication skills. But you gain motivation to say, okay, I really can. When you show yourself that you can speak in the language, you feel very comfortable to and do whatever you have to do in the language. And yeah, it also helped me a lot of the motivation. And yeah, and here we are. I still don't speak Polish like so well, as people can see in our episode in Polish, but yeah, so it was actually I found my language partner 4 months ago, so it's not something very old. It didn't happen like long ago. So, but the impact in my Polish skills was really huge.
Okay, and how about grammar? Because actually, you're talking about speaking, using language, activating your skills, your knowledge from your flashcards and movies and songs. But how about grammar? Because my students usually struggle, complain with cases, and they say, "Oh my God, it's impossible to understand this language because you're changing your endings all the time. How is it possible?" So, how do you think, is it possible to understand grammar case, and maybe you have some solution for cases, maybe you have some explanation, maybe you know something more like a foreigner than me, like a native speaker, how to understand cases?
Yeah, cases was really interesting because I already knew cases from German, but I didn't know that actually nouns could change. So when I started learning Polish, it was really shocking that nouns could change. And I didn't know how to approach it in the beginning. And actually, I think it was a good approach to not focus on like grammar and on the cases explicitly. So just don't ask a lot why, because some things I think like if you need to memorize why something happened, you will like use your time and energy to memorize these things, rules, instead of memorizing words and express something that you're going to use. But once you start to have more examples in your mind, some phrases, for example, if you learn that at home is w domu, you already know that the word dom with the preposition v becomes domu. So you already have one example. So you know that w domu is at home. So it's like one example that you have for a case. Then you can check the rule to have a clarification. But if you try to learn the rule, the change, the vocabulary, everything at once, I think is too much for the brain to memorize. And in the beginning, I tried just to accept, okay, dom becomes w domu or do domu, and it is what it is. I don't try to ask a lot. But once you start to gain more knowledge of the language, about grammar, then I think it's more interesting to check the things. Just to not make the same mistakes all the time and to not be speaking wrongly all the time. Sometimes we don't learn some phrases, but we try to create our own phrases, and it's good to always double check. That's why the professional feedback is very important from your tutor, from your teacher, from your language partner, to know if that you are making mistakes. This is something that I had like one episode of my podcast. The Polish teacher, like Paulina Lipiec from the podcast Polski Daily, she mentioned something very interesting, that some Russian-speaking people here, they learn Polish very fast, but because of the fact that Polish people don't correct them often, they keep making the same mistakes forever. And they communicate perfectly, but they don't have the feedback about it. So this feedback is very important about cases. So you have the feedback, the correction, and then you can say why. Once you already have examples, then it's easier to memorize rules. But if you try to memorize rules when you don't have example, I think it will just take your energy, your memory, and I think it's not a good approach. And when you start learning Polish, I think it's also important that read a little bit about the language to know that cases exist. Because I didn't know that cases exist, and if you know that they exist, you can be aware that they will appear, and you can focus on memorizing patterns since the beginning. Because if you start recognizing, and not memorize, but recognize the patterns in the language, I think it's a very good beginning. Even if you don't know the rules, your brain will start to recognize these patterns. It's really good. But if you do like I was doing when I started, had no idea about what were cases, had never read about. I mean, I knew about German, but in Polish it's more complex. Then things will get a little bit harder. You can create bad habits of using the language. So yeah, just to get when you start, I think it's good to know what it is very basically, to not go so deeply into it in the beginning.
And I think we should also add that at the beginning you should remember we also have grammar gender, and grammar gender is something that complicate all the problem of case more and more, because this grammar gender, of course, I guess in Portuguese you have grammar gender, and most of languages you speak they have grammar gender, and grammar gender is not about you can see the word gender, and it's not about gender, it's not about our sex, it's not about being man or woman. it's related to endings, to last letters every single noun, and we have very specific rules how to recognize all genders. Of course we have exceptions, but it's not that Polish is a very exceptional language full of exceptions, but it's Polish exceptions are just because Polish is a natural language that we still use, and every language has a lot of exceptions. And if you think it's exception again, and Polish it's impossible to speak. So no, guys, it's not like that. So we have grammar gender, and you have to remember every time you try to figure Polish out, and cases and changes and endings, you have to remember every time we have to use every type of gender. We have, of course, female, male, female, and neutral gender. But of course, I think these names are very confusing because, just like I said, it's not about our sexuality and about sex. It's just about the last letter in the word, to be specific. So I think you should try to find your like model word. I mean model nouns. So let's say you can just choose 3 words, and it's gonna be something like dom, kobieta, and okno. And every time you try to make new sentence, you should check changes of these endings in every specific context, and you don't have to follow my examples, but let's try to check in many in other examples, and let's keep a wider view and don't focus, and please remember, like, every language is different, and it doesn't make sense to follow your native language, or maybe also to follow English, because it doesn't make sense to translate every sentence word by word, because guys, let's imagine if you're English speakers, so maybe my example it won't work very well, but if you speak another native language, and let's imagine question, have you ever been to Rome, for example? So it doesn't make sense to translate this word have you ever been to Rome, just word by word in this order, because it's not how language works, and it shows that every language is a separated system, but it's still a system, so it's possible to understand it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like some tips for people they want to learn how to use the genders properly is like when I said about making phrases and flashcards, you can try to use to add this in front of in front of the nouns, so you always know what's the gender that you have in that noun, so you're memorizing the noun already with the gender. And I think it's also like a good approach, and something that also regarding gender but also regarding number is to learn plurals, because like in many languages plurals are very simple and regular, but in Polish they aren't. So try to learn a word, when you learn a word in singular, try to learn it as well in plural, so you know how to use both of them. And not only in plural, because like in Polish you have this difference between 1, 2, and 5. So learn like how to say 1 man, 2 men, 5 men. So you learn all the forms that you are going to use. I think it's like it helps you to have a repertoire to use the language since the beginning. Especially with the basic words, and you said like you choose some words to notice the patterns, and I think it also helps. And you said about like, yeah, every language says things in different ways. Like you're saying about have you ever been to Rome? I think in our language we would not use like that. We would say like have you ever gone to Rome? Like in Spanish, Portuguese. The most important is to understand the message. And every language we transmit different messages in different ways. So it's important to not focus on word by word, but actually how to transmit this message in the way the other culture has. Because every culture has a different aspect, and they transmit these messages according to the culture. So it's very important to take into account as well.
Yes, guys. Also, we can look at Polish language like something about some positive in Polish language, because, for example, we have only 3 tenses and verbal aspect of verbs, and so actually it makes we have like 4 verbal constructions that we have, and so when you compare it to English, so you can see there are like 16 or 20, or I don't know how many, but it's much easier to learn Polish verbal expressions. And so, for example, if you know language that has like 20 verbal constructions, and you think about Polish and you try to learn Polish verbs, so it's much easier to you to understand. For example, you can compare your skills, you can compare your knowledge to Polish, and it helps you a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a good example about tenses. Like when people say, Polish is a very hard language, I think about, okay, there are also a lot of very simple things in Polish language, and one of them are the tenses. And if you compare to Spanish, Portuguese is like really, really simple in Polish, because basically almost all the tenses that you can express in Polish you have in Spanish and Portuguese, and you have even more. So we just need to learn like which one correspond to which one that we have. And yeah, aspects. I personally find aspects a little bit more challenging because they are irregular than cases, for example. But you just need to understand the concept. I think it's and also like we said about learning nouns. When you learn the noun in singular and plural, you can try to learn the verb as well in both aspects. So you learn how to express both of them once you know already the concept. And yeah, and also for example, articles is something that in Polish is you don't have articles, so it makes it very simple as well. Because if you speak like German, for example, you know how articles can be really like something challenging. And also pronunciation in Polish is like not so hard. You read how you write. It's something that is not very hard. The stress in Polish is almost always the same, which helps a lot. So once you learn the sounds in the language, you can read it very well. There are a lot of aspects that make Polish not as hard as it could be.
Yes, but also I think also you should remember grammar is very important, but not the most important. And you're all foreigners. I suppose you're all foreigners, so you'll make mistakes until you die in Polish. Yes, but it's true. So, guys, that's true. So I have the same situation, for example, when I speak Czech. So let's imagine I know, I guess, the most similar language to my native language, and I know I make mistakes all my life in Czech, and I will make, and I was making this mistakes. So it's it's just like it happens. It happens all the time. So you're only foreigners and only people. You're not robots. So it's just impossible to not to make mistakes. But also, please remember, grammar is very important. And if you completely ignore grammar, and if you decide to not to use cases, at some point you realize it won't impossible to speak Polish. I mean, maybe you, of course, you will still able to produce Polish sounds and words and pronounce it, but people won't understand you. And I think it's very important, especially for people who are going to pass certificate exam, B1 exam, apply for a long stay in Poland. So guys, please don't ignore grammar.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like we cannot skip grammar. And I said that I don't focus on grammar. It's not that I don't learn grammar, but I don't study grammar. So if I have a class with a tutor, I will not have a class about grammar, but I will have some grammar clarifications about things that I didn't understand. So I will not make the same mistakes all the time. I will have some corrections, and I will understand for the next time I will try to apply this pattern as well. So yeah, instead of focusing on studying grammar, we can just learn grammar by examples, by the patterns, and by having a feedback from the professional. So when we arrive in a higher level, we make sure that we have vocabulary, but we can also communicate without making so many mistakes.
Yes, also I think at some point you should start reading in Polish. I mean, after you receive some fluency. I mean, just like not fluency, just like when you're able to speak, to when you're able to express your thoughts in English and make some communication, you should start reading Polish. And I think reading shows a lot. And so I think a great exercise is just to read the text, check vocabulary, and then ask a question, why and how it works here. Of course, it's very difficult, especially if you're not linguist, if you don't know a lot of foreign languages, and if you struggle with languages because you're not experts in it. But it's very important to ask a question, why and what happens here, and what you should read. So of course this question is very very difficult to answer very easy way just in one short podcast. But maybe when you receive some fluency, you can try to read. You can buy newspapers. And I have one story. I have a very nice story about it. I had a student from Vietnam, and she has been living in Poland like for 20 years, and she couldn't speak Polish, and she struggled a lot because she has children in Polish school. She actually had, because they are adults, so she had children in Polish school, and she couldn't communicate with their teachers, for example. And someday she decided to learn Polish and she bought the cheapest newspaper in Biedronka, I guess. It could be a newspaper just like Chwila dla Ciebie. It's super entertaining newspaper. The stories there are very simple. They don't have very sophisticated vocabulary. Grammar structures are usually simple, and vocabulary repeats a lot. So you can and she was reading these newspapers, and that's how she learned Polish with no tutor actually, and she speaks Polish very well now. So you can say it's just like it's hard work, and also of course she had to put some lot of contribution into this goal, but also she found some funny way, because she loved that reading that newspapers, that entertaining newspapers with very short and funny stories. So maybe you should find your hobby in Polish, for example. Maybe you want to meet a girlfriend, for example. So maybe let's try to use Polish on Tinder, for example. Yeah, maybe you like drawing, so let's go for drawing course in Polish, or whatever. Maybe you like music, so let's start to listen to Polish music. So there are many ways.
Yeah, I totally agree when you said about reading in Polish. I think it's very important because when you read, we notice the endings of the cases much easier than when we listen. Because when people talk fast, we are more focused on the message than in the endings. But when we read, we can notice more the patterns. And like I said, also the topics that we learn is important. So try to find something you read about topics you find interesting. So like if you like football, you can read about football. If you like to talk about food, you can read about food. To learn vocabulary in the topics that you like to use the most, and then you want to use the most, so you can express your thoughts, like you said, in a better way. And yeah, and some languages they have like the written language is very different than the spoken language, and I think the written Polish is like not easy. So it's used to you can find as well some books or newspapers or something for your level. You can look for some stories for even in the beginning, A1, A2, just to get used to the written language and how people change the position of the words in written languages, the expressions that people use in the written language that they don't use in the spoken language. So you can get used not only to the spoken version, but as well to the written version. And once when you have like a higher level, you will be already used to the written language, and you can start reading books, and you don't need to learn like a written language, like a different language that you had no idea about. So it's good. It's a good habit to create.
Okay, yeah, I guess it's all for today. And usually I finish my lessons with this sentence. So let's feel like my students. I guess it's all for today. Yeah, so I think it's all for today. So I hope we helped you a little bit. And I'm a teacher, I'm a native speaker, so my perspective is totally different than yours and even yours. So it's very complicated for me to understand. You're struggling sometimes, usually actually, I guess. I hope you don't give up, and I hope you find someday good teachers, tutors, language partners, life partners who can speak Polish to practice your Polish, for example. Please remember there are a lot of options, and you can use them.
Oh yeah, so finding a partner, I think maybe this is like one of the number one reason of immigration to Poland, right? At least among the people I know. And so it's also a good reason as well, like for the reason why many people want to learn Polish. So yeah, and to understand better the culture, like I think the culture is also connected to the language. And if you live in Poland, to try to really understand life here, the culture, what Polish people do, the traditions, the holidays, the history. I'm sure that if you will understand better the country, the people, you will be more motivated to learn the language and to understand the language. Especially because you can use the language as the tool to understand people and the culture.
Thank you, and it's all for today. Bye.
Great.